Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive that I think you're going to find super interesting. We're going to be talking about philosophy.
Yeah, philosophy. I know. It can sound a little intimidating, but trust me, it's way more exciting than you might think. We're going to be looking at this excerpt called Philosophy and Its Questions. It's from a text with, well, a title that's a little hard to pronounce, honestly. It's called Que Wushio, but basically it seems to be a really cool introduction to philosophy, and it's all about these big questions, the kind of stuff that really makes you think.
Yeah, the kind of questions we all probably ask ourselves at some point, right?
Totally. Like, what's the meaning of life? What happens after we die? Is there a right way to live?
Exactly. And this excerpt actually starts with a story about a girl named Emma, who is constantly asking these why questions.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. She was so curious about everything.
And that's exactly what philosophy is all about. It's about that love of wisdom, that pursuit of understanding.
So it's not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions. Exactly. It's about being curious and open to exploring different ideas.
I like that. And even though we might think of philosophy as like something from ancient Greece with guys in togas,
Yeah.
it's actually still very relevant today, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are philosophers today who are grappling with questions about things like artificial intelligence, climate change, the nature of consciousness, things that are shaping our world right now.
That's a really good point. But I mean, speaking of ancient Greece, we can't talk about philosophy without mentioning those founding fathers, right? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
Oh, absolutely. Those guys were giants.
And what I find so interesting is that they each had their own unique way of approaching philosophy.
Yeah, they definitely weren't all in agreement.
No. Like, what about Socrates? He was all about questioning everything, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. He believed that the unexamined life wasn't worth living. He was famous for, well, basically annoying everyone by constantly challenging their beliefs. But he did it in the search for truth.
Yeah. And didn't he have that famous saying? Something about knowing that he knows nothing.
Yeah, he said, the more I learn, the less I know.
Right, that's the one. It's kind of a paradox, but it makes you think, for sure.
And then you have Plato, who was Socrates' student, and he came up with this whole idea of ideal forms.
Ideal forms.
Yeah, so have you ever noticed how every chair is different, but they all kind of share a certain chairness?
Yeah, I guess so.
Plato believed that there's like this perfect, unchanging form of a chair. It exists in a realm beyond our senses. And all the chairs we see in the physical world are just imperfect copies of that ideal form.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a little mind-bending.
But it's like there's this perfect blueprint for everything.
Right, exactly. Like a perfect blueprint for a chair, for beauty, for justice, for everything.
That's pretty wild. So Plato's all up in the clouds with these perfect ideas. But then you have Aristotle, who was Plato's student, and he was much more, I guess you could say, down to earth.
Yeah, Aristotle was all about observation and logic. He believed that we could understand the world by carefully studying the things around us, gathering evidence and drawing conclusions based on reason and experience.
So Plato's the dreamer, and Aristotle's the scientist.
That's a good way to put it.
But I can see how both of their approaches have influenced the way we think about things today.
Oh, absolutely. And it didn't stop there. The text also mentions some more recent thinkers, like Immanuel Kant and Friedrich Nietzsche.
Oh, yeah, I heard of him. Yeah.
He's the one who famously said, God is dead.
Whoa. That's pretty intense.
Yeah, he was challenging traditional values. He encouraged people to create their own meaning in a world without, as he saw it, inherent purpose.
So, like, we're all responsible for making our own meaning.
Exactly. It's a pretty radical idea, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
It is. And speaking of thought-provoking, I'm curious about how all of this breaks down in terms of what philosophers actually study. The text mentioned different branches of philosophy like ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. To be honest, it seems like a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it can be.
So, like, what are those different branches all about?
Well, think of it like this. Each branch is like a different lens through which we can examine those big questions of life.
Okay, I think I can follow that.
So, for example, ethics is all about morality. Right and wrong, good and bad.
So, like, should I steal that cookie from the jar?
Exactly. Or, more serious questions like, should we always tell the truth? Or, is it ever okay to break a promise?
Okay, so ethics is about figuring out how to live a good life.
Pretty much.
What about metaphysics? That one sounds kind of mysterious.
Yeah, metaphysics can get pretty mind-bending. It deals with the nature of reality itself.
So, like, what is the universe made of?
Yeah. Or, does time have a beginning and an end? What is consciousness? Things like that.
Whoa. Those are some heavy questions.
They are.
And then there was, what was it again? Epistemology.
Oh, right, epistemology.
Yeah.
That one's all about knowledge.
Knowledge, like how to use Wikipedia.
Huh. Well, kind of.
Yeah.
But more like, how do we know what we know? What are the sources of knowledge? How can we be sure that our beliefs are true?
So it's like taking a step back and questioning how we know anything at all.
Exactly. It gets to the very foundation of how we understand the world.
Wow, I never thought about it like that before. It seems like all these branches are kind of connected, though. Like they're all trying to answer different parts of the same big puzzles.
You're absolutely right. That's what makes studying philosophy so fascinating. You start to see these connections between different ideas and approaches, and it can really change the way you think about the world and your place in it.
Yeah, I can already feel my brain getting a workout. But okay, before we go too deep into those branches, I want to take a moment to talk about some of the really famous and influential ideas that have come out of philosophy, like the kind of stuff that people still talk about today.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. There are definitely some real gems in the history of philosophy, ideas that have had a huge impact on the way we think and live today.
I'm ready to hear about them.
All right, well, let's see. There's this one guy, René Descartes. He had this really famous saying, "I think, therefore I am."
I think I've heard of that one.
It's one of those ideas that sounds simple, but is actually really profound.
So, like, just by thinking, we prove that we exist.
Right. It gets into some deep questions about consciousness and the nature of self.
That's pretty mind-blowing. What else is there?
Well, there's utilitarianism, which is the idea that the best actions are the ones that create the most happiness for the most people.
So, like, if I have a cookie, I should share it with everyone to maximize happiness.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. But the basic idea is that we should focus on maximizing overall well-being.
I can see how that could be a useful way to think about making decisions.
Yeah, it's definitely a popular ethical framework. But of course, there are other ethical theories too, and they often come into conflict.
Like what?
Well, like deontology, for example. That focuses on following moral rules, regardless of the consequences.
So it's more about doing what's right, even if it doesn't lead to the most happiness.
Exactly. It's a very different approach to ethics.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see how philosophy isn't just about abstract ideas, but about real-world choices and dilemmas.
It definitely is. And it can help us think through those choices in a more careful and deliberate way.
I like that. Well, this is all really interesting, but I'm curious to know how these ideas actually play out in everyday life. Like, does philosophy have any practical value beyond just, thinking deep thoughts?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn just how relevant philosophy can be to their lives. Remember Emma, the girl from the excerpt who was asking all those questions?
Yeah, she was great.
The text actually shows how she starts to see philosophical questions popping up everywhere. In her conversations with friends, in the decisions she makes, even in the way she experiences the world around her.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Like when she tried to talk to her friends about what makes them happy, and everyone had a totally different answer.
Right. It just goes to show that there's not always one right answer.
Yeah.
And philosophy can help us understand those different perspectives and maybe even challenge our own assumptions about things.
Yeah, I can see that. So philosophy can actually help us navigate the complexities of life.
It really can. The text specifically mentions two schools of thought that offer some really practical guidance for living: Stoicism and existentialism.
Stoicism, I've definitely heard of that. It seems to be pretty popular these days.
It is.
But to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it's all about.
Well, Stoicism is an ancient philosophy that emphasizes virtue, reason, and living in accordance with nature. One of its key principles is learning to accept what we can't control and focusing our energy on what we can.
Okay, that makes sense. But can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine you're stuck in traffic. You could get all frustrated and angry, which won't actually change the situation. Or you could accept that it's out of your control and use the time to listen to your favorite podcast or practice some mindfulness.
Yeah, that's a much better way to handle it. So Stoicism is about staying calm and resilient even when things are tough.
Exactly. Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius believe that by controlling our thoughts and reactions, we could find inner peace and fulfillment no matter what's happening around us.
I can see how that would be helpful in today's world. Things can feel pretty chaotic sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And then there's existentialism, which is all about freedom, responsibility, and the search for meaning in a world that, well, might not have any inherent purpose.
Whoa, okay. So if Stoicism is about accepting what we can't control, existentialism is about taking ownership of the choices we do have.
You got it. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre believe that we're free to create our own values and define ourselves through the choices we make.
So there's no grand plan. We're just making it up as we go along.
In a way, yes. There's no predetermined path. We're constantly creating our own meaning through our actions.
It's like we're all artists, but the medium we're working with is our own lives.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It captures the sense of both freedom and responsibility that existentialism is all about. Sartre famously said, "We are condemned to be free."
Condemned to be free.
Yeah, it means that we can't escape the burden of choice, and we have to deal with the consequences that come with it.
So it's not just about freedom, but also about taking responsibility for that freedom.
Exactly.
It's pretty powerful stuff, and maybe a little scary, too.
It can be,
Mhm.
but it's also incredibly empowering. Existentialism encourages us to live authentically, to make choices that are true to ourselves, and to create meaning even in a world that might seem meaningless.
So it's about embracing the unknown and shaping our own destinies.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how both Stoicism and existentialism can offer some really practical tools for navigating life. But I'm curious, what about those of us who are drawn to things like art, beauty, and creativity? Does philosophy have anything to say to us?
Absolutely. In fact, there's a whole branch of philosophy dedicated to exploring the nature of beauty, art, and taste. It's called aesthetics.
Aesthetics. I've heard that term before, but to be honest, I'm not really sure what it means.
Well, think about a time when you were really moved by a piece of art, like a painting, a song, a film, anything. What was it about that experience that resonated with you? What made it beautiful?
That's a good question.
Aesthetics tries to grapple with those questions. It explores the nature of beauty, whether it's objective or subjective, and how we experience and appreciate art.
So, is beauty in the eye of the beholder?
That's one of the big debates in aesthetics. Some philosophers argue that beauty is inherent in the object itself, based on certain qualities or proportions. Others believe that beauty is totally subjective, shaped by our own personal experiences and preferences.
So there's no right answer.
That's the beauty of it. Pun intended, haha. Philosophy encourages us to think critically about our own assumptions, explore different perspectives, and embrace the complexity of these questions. There might not be a single definitive answer to what makes something beautiful, but the process of exploring that question can enrich our understanding and appreciation of art and the world around us.
I like that. It's like philosophy is giving us permission to appreciate beauty in all its forms.
Exactly. And beyond aesthetics, philosophy also intersects with a ton of other disciplines, offering valuable insights and a broader perspective.
You know, I'm really starting to see how philosophy isn't just this isolated field of study. It connects to so many different areas of life.
It really does. For instance, philosophy and science have this long and intertwined history. While science focuses on explaining the how of the natural world, philosophy grapples with the why behind those scientific discoveries.
So it's like philosophy helps us understand the bigger picture.
Exactly. And then there's history. Philosophers of history help us interpret past events, understand their causes and consequences, and see how they connect to the present.
It's like philosophy gives us the tools to think critically about history.
Right. And we can't forget about political philosophy, which explores questions about government, justice, and the ideal society.
So philosophy can actually influence the way societies are structured.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinkers like John Locke, for example, had a huge influence on ideas about freedom and the role of government.
Wow, I didn't realize how powerful philosophy could be.
And then there's the relationship between philosophy and religion, which is a whole other can of worms. Philosophers of religion explore questions about the existence of God, the nature of faith, the problem of evil, the relationship between reason and revelation. You know, all the big stuff.
So whether you're a believer or a skeptic, philosophy can help you grapple with these really fundamental questions.
Exactly. It encourages us to examine our own beliefs and engage in respectful dialogue with others.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground. It's amazing to see how philosophy touches on so many different aspects of life.
It really is a vast and multifaceted field. And remember, it's not about finding all the right answers. It's about cultivating curiosity, embracing critical thinking, and engaging in meaningful conversations about the things that matter most.
I'm starting to understand why Emma, the girl in the excerpt, was so drawn to philosophy. It's not about being an expert, it's about the joy of exploring these big questions and seeing how they connect to everything around us.
You got it. And I think that's a key takeaway for our listeners as well. Philosophy is an ongoing journey of inquiry. It's something we can all engage with, regardless of our background or expertise.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to think about their own philosophical journey? What questions are you grappling with? What ideas spark your curiosity? Let's keep exploring together.
I like that. Let's keep the conversation going.
So we talked about some pretty heavy stuff like, is there meaning in life? And how do we know anything for sure?
Yeah, we did get kind of deep there.
But I think now would be a good time to bring it back down to earth a bit. How can we actually use these philosophical ideas in our everyday lives?
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in the big abstract concepts, but philosophy can actually be incredibly practical.
So it's not just about thinking deep thoughts in an armchair.
Not at all. In
Okay.
fact, philosophy can give us some really useful tools for navigating the ups and downs of life.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Well, remember Emma from the excerpt, the girl who's asking all those questions.
Oh yeah, Emma, she was great.
The text shows how she starts to see those philosophical questions popping up everywhere in her life, like in her relationships, her decisions, even just in the way she experiences the world.
Right, it wasn't just theoretical stuff for her anymore.
Exactly. And the text specifically talks about two philosophical schools of thought that offer some really practical guidance for living: Stoicism and existentialism.
Okay, I've definitely heard of Stoicism. It seems to be having a bit of a moment these days.
Yeah, it's definitely become more popular in recent years.
But to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it's all about.
Well, the basic idea is that we should focus on what we can control and accept the things that we can't.
That sounds kind of zen.
It is, in a way.
Yeah.
Stoicism is all about finding inner peace and tranquility by letting go of things that are outside of our control.
So like if I miss my train, I shouldn't get all stressed out about it.
Right, because getting upset won't actually change the situation.
Right.
Instead, you can focus on what you can do, like finding another way to get where you need to go.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't that kind of passive? Like just accepting everything that life throws at you?
It's not about being passive. It's about being intentional with your energy. Stoics believe that by focusing on our own thoughts and actions, we can find a sense of inner freedom even in the face of external challenges.
I like that. So it's about choosing how you respond to things rather than letting your emotions control you.
Exactly.
What about existentialism?
Existentialism. That one's a little more, shall we say, intense?
Okay. I'm ready for it.
Well, existentialism is all about freedom, but it's also about the responsibility that comes with that freedom.
So like Spider-Man's motto, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, kind of. Existentialists believe that we have the power to create our own meaning and purpose in life. But that also means that we're fully responsible for the choices we make.
So there's no preordained plan. We're just kind of thrown into this world and have to figure it out for ourselves.
Pretty much. Existentialists would say that there's no inherent meaning or purpose in the universe. We have to create that meaning for ourselves.
Wow, that's a pretty big responsibility.
It is. But it's also incredibly liberating because it means that we have the power to shape our own destinies.
So it's not about finding the right answer. It's about creating your own answer.
Exactly. And existentialists believe that this process of creating meaning is ongoing. It's something we do through our actions, our choices, and our relationships.
So it's not a one-time thing. It's a constant process of becoming.
Right.
I can see how both Stoicism and existentialism offer some really valuable perspectives on how to live a meaningful life. But I'm curious, what about those of us who aren't necessarily looking for like a grand philosophical framework for life? What about people who are just drawn to things like art, beauty, and creativity? Does philosophy have anything to say to them?
Absolutely. In fact, there's a whole branch of philosophy dedicated to exploring those very things. It's called aesthetics. Yeah. Have you ever wondered what makes something beautiful? Or why a particular piece of art moves you in a certain way?
Yeah, I guess I have.
Well, aesthetics tries to answer those questions.
Yeah.
It delves into the nature of beauty, art, and taste.
So is there like a formula for beauty?
Not exactly. One of the big questions in aesthetics is whether beauty is objective or subjective. Some philosophers argue that beauty is inherent in the object itself, like certain proportions or qualities that make something inherently pleasing to the eye. Others say that beauty is entirely in the eye of the beholder, meaning that our personal experiences, cultural background, and individual preferences shape what we find beautiful.
So there's no right answer.
That's the great thing about philosophy. There are often multiple perspectives and interpretations, and aesthetics encourages us to think critically about our own assumptions about beauty and art.
I like that. It's like philosophy is giving us permission to appreciate beauty in all its diverse forms.
Exactly. And beyond aesthetics, philosophy also connects to a whole bunch of other fields.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for one, Philosophy and science have a long and intertwined history.
That's interesting.
While science focuses on explaining how things work, philosophy delves into the why behind those scientific discoveries.
So it's like philosophy helps us understand the bigger picture of scientific progress.
Right. And then there's history. Philosophers of history help us interpret past events, understand their causes and consequences, and see how they connect to the present.
So philosophy gives us tools for thinking critically about history.
Exactly. And we can't forget about political philosophy, which deals with questions about government, justice, and the ideal society.
Oh, right, like those big thinkers who influenced revolutions and stuff.
Exactly. Political philosophy provides a framework for debating those fundamental questions about how we should live together as a society.
Wow, this is all starting to feel very interconnected.
It is. And finally, there's the relationship between philosophy and religion, which is a complex and fascinating area.
I can imagine.
Philosophers of religion grapple with questions about the existence of God, the nature of faith, the problem of evil, all those big existential questions.
So whether you're a believer or a skeptic, philosophy offers a way to engage with those questions in a meaningful way.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered so much ground. It's amazing to see how philosophy connects to so many different aspects of life.
It really is a vast and multifaceted field. But at its core, it's about cultivating curiosity, embracing critical thinking, and having those meaningful conversations about the things that matter most.
I'm starting to get why Emma, the girl in your excerpt, was so drawn to philosophy. It's not about being an expert. It's about the joy of exploring these big questions and seeing how they connect to the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key takeaway for our listeners. Philosophy is an ongoing journey of inquiry. It's something we can all participate in, regardless of our background or level of expertise.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to keep those philosophical gears turning. What questions are you wrestling with? What ideas spark your curiosity? Let's keep exploring together. It's amazing how much ground we've covered just talking about this one excerpt, Philosophy and Its Questions.
Oh, I know, right? It's really packed a punch.
And from a text that had, a title I still can't quite pronounce.
The Insano tone, yeah.
Yeah, that one. But it really shows how philosophy, even though it sounds kind of academic, can actually be really relatable.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think using Emma's story was such a smart way to do that in the text.
Oh, definitely. She was like the stand-in for all of us, just starting to ask those big questions.
And she didn't even have to go to some fancy philosophy school or anything.
Right. She just let her curiosity lead the way.
Which is what we were saying before. That's what philosophy really is.
It's not about memorizing a bunch of facts or having all the answers.
It's about the journey of asking questions, being open to different perspectives, and maybe even changing your mind along the way.
It's kind of like we're all on this big philosophical adventure together.
I like that.
And remember how the excerpt ended with Emma writing down her own philosophical questions?
Oh, yeah. And then she talked about them with her family.
It was such a great example of how philosophy can be something we share with others, not just something we think about by ourselves.
Totally. It can spark some amazing conversations.
And sometimes even lead to some friendly disagreements.
Yeah, that's part of the fun.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, I have some big questions too, that's awesome.
It means you're already on the right track.
It really does. And that brings us to something we wanted to leave you with today.
If philosophy is all about asking questions, what's that one question that's really bugging you right now?
Ooh, I love that. What's that question that keeps you up at night?
It makes you want to go down a Google rabbit hole.
That you wish you had a clear answer to.
And it could be anything. Something about the meaning of life, the nature of reality, ethics, politics, art, anything.
And even if you don't have a fully formed question, just think about what areas of life make you really curious.
What topics make you want to learn more, to understand better?
Because acknowledging that curiosity is the first step to embarking on your own philosophical journey.
And trust me, it's a journey worth taking.
We've only scratched the surface in this deep dive, but hopefully it's given you a taste of what philosophy is all about.
And maybe even inspired you to do some exploring on your own.
So keep those questions coming, keep that curiosity alive, and keep engaging with the world in a thoughtful and open-minded way.
Because the world needs more curious people like you.
Thanks for joining us on this philosophical adventure.
It's been a pleasure.